Good evening, and welcome back to Voices from the Other Side. Cruise ships promise paradise at sea, luxury, romance, escape. But beneath the music, the glittering lights, and the endless buffets lies a darker truth. Because when you're trapped in the middle of the ocean, thousands of miles from safety, anything can happen. Tonight, we set sail on 10 chilling stories where dream vacations became floating nightmares. From vanishings and stalkers to storms, obsessions, and even cartel violence, these are the stories cruise lines don't want you to hear. So dim the lights, put on your headphones, and remember, once you're at sea, there's nowhere to run. Story 1, The Vanishing Friend. Cruises are supposed to be safe. They're floating cities with thousands of passengers, cameras on every deck, and security guards watching the halls. Families celebrate anniversaries, couples toast to new beginnings, and friends laugh under the stars. But sometimes, those stars are the last thing someone ever sees. This is the story of Amanda, a young woman who boarded a Mediterranean cruise with her best friend, but never came home. And what happened between the piano lounge and her cabin still haunts everyone who was there. Boarding the dream. Amanda and her best friend, Jennifer, had known each other since childhood. They grew up in the same town, graduated together, and even shared an apartment for a few years before life pulled them in different directions. Now, both in their early 30s, they wanted one last adventure before real life fully set in. Jennifer had just gotten engaged, and Amanda had gone through a difficult breakup. This cruise was supposed to be a celebration, a chance to breathe, to reset, to just be two friends again. They booked a cabin together on the oasis of the seas, a ship with 15 decks, dozens of restaurants, swimming pools, theaters, and even a miniature park in the middle of the vessel. It was marketed as the ultimate escape. And at first it was. The notes. It began with a piece of paper slipped under their cabin door. Jennifer found it first. A folded scrap with just 3 words written in blocky letters. You are watched. She laughed nervously, showing Amanda. Probably some idiot trying to be funny. Amanda didn't laugh. Her hands shook as she held the note. This isn't funny, Jen. The next morning, there was another note. This time longer. You can't hide. I see you. Jennifer wanted to report it immediately, but Amanda begged her not to. What if it's just a prank? I don't want to make a scene. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her. At dinner, she'd glance over her shoulder. In the theater, she'd suddenly turn as if someone had whispered her name. And every time, no one was there. The women lounged by the pool during the day, danced to live music at night, and explored every deck like kids in a candy store. Jennifer later described those first few days as the happiest Amanda had been in months. But by the 3rd night, things started to feel wrong. The night of the disappearance. The night Amanda vanished was supposed to be ordinary. Jennifer had convinced her to join a group of fellow passengers at the piano lounge, a cozy bar with live music and a dim glow of golden lights. They sang along to old Billy Joel songs, clinked glasses, and tried to forget the creeping dread of the notes. Around midnight, Amanda said she was heading back to the cabin. She seemed distracted, her eyes darting toward the hallway outside the lounge. Jennifer hugged her, saying, "Don't wait up, I'll be in later." It was the last time she saw her alive. The the footage. The next morning, Amanda's bed was empty. Jennifer assumed she'd gone to breakfast early, but hours passed and there was still no sign of her. Her clothes, her bag, even her insulin medication were untouched. Amanda never went anywhere without it. Panic set in. Jennifer rushed to guest services, demanding to know where her friend was. That's when they pulled the security footage. The last recorded image of Amanda was her leaving the piano lounge at 12:07 a.m. She walked calmly down the corridor, her hair swinging behind her, yellow dress catching the light. She turned the corner toward the cabins, and then nothing ever entered her room. She never appeared on another camera. It was as if the hallway had swallowed her whole. The crew's reaction. Jennifer begged the crew to search the ship. She didn't just vanish. Someone must have taken her, check the cabins, check the restricted areas, do something. But the staff brushed her off. Ma'am, sometimes passengers disembark early or meet someone and choose not to return to their rooms, the officer said with a practiced smile. Your friend is an adult. Perhaps she's simply enjoying herself elsewhere. Jennifer slammed her hand on the counter. She didn't just wander off. She's diabetic. Her insulin is still in the cabin. If she doesn't have it, she could die. The officer frowned but remained calm, almost rehearsed. We'll make a note of it and keep watch. Please try not to worry. Jennifer would later recall how surreal it felt, like screaming into a void, like nobody wanted to admit something bad had happened on their perfect cruise. The whisper. By the final night, Jennifer was unraveling. She confided in a fellow passenger she'd befriended earlier in the week. He later described her as pale, shaking, barely able to get the words out. She didn't leave, Jennifer whispered, glancing over her shoulder. She was taken. Her eyes darted to every passerby, every crew member. They don't believe me. No one believes me. But I know someone's watching. Someone's been watching us the whole time, the stalker. Only later did Jennifer reveal the truth. Amanda had been receiving more than just cryptic notes. She had been followed by a man she didn't recognize. He lingered outside the piano lounge, appeared in the buffet line behind her, stood just a little too close in the elevators. And one night, she found another note under the cabin door. This one wasn't vague. Amanda, you're mine. She showed it to Jennifer, her hands trembling, begging her not to tell anyone. If we make noise, it'll only make it worse. Please, Jen. Jennifer tried to convince her to report it anyway, but Amanda refused. And now she was gone, the aftermath. When the cruise ended, Amanda's name was called during disembarkation. She never answered. Her suitcase was still neatly packed, her passport still in the drawer, her insulin untouched. She had simply disappeared. Authorities boarded, took statements, and interviewed Jennifer extensively, but the case quickly became tangled. The cruise line downplayed the incident, insisting there was no evidence of foul play. Rumors spread that Amanda had jumped or slipped or decided to vanish on her own. But Jennifer never believed it. She didn't jump, she told reporters later. She didn't run away. She was taken. Someone was after her, and they got her. The horror of cruise ship disappearances. Amanda's case isn't unique. Over the last 2 decades, hundreds of passengers have vanished from cruise ships under mysterious circumstances. Some fall overboard, some jump, but many, like Amanda, simply vanish without explanation. here's the chilling truth. Cruise ships are not required to report every disappearance. Many cases are quietly buried under corporate statements, hidden behind the sparkle of advertising and the promise of safe luxury travel. Amanda's disappearance remains unsolved. Her body was never found. No arrests were made, and Jennifer, she never took another cruise again. Final words. So the next time you step aboard a cruise ship, think about Amanda. The cameras can't watch every corner. The crew may dismiss your fears, and once the shoreline fades, there's nowhere to run. Remember, not everyone who boards makes it home. Amanda's friend swore she was taken. But the next danger came not from the sea, but from someone paid to serve you. And his watchful eyes were far from harmless. Story 2. The crewman who watched too closely. Cruises are supposed to feel safe. Everything is controlled: the food, the entertainment, the cabins. And above all, the staff is there to take care of you. But what if the very person meant to make you feel comfortable was the one making you unsafe? Tonight's story is about a woman who took a solo cruise, hoping for independence and relaxation. Instead, she found herself trapped on a floating city with nowhere to run, and a crewman who was always watching. Act 1, the start of the cruise. Her name was Claire, 31 years old, adventurous, independent. Her friends teased her about booking a cruise alone, but she brushed it off. "It'll be fine," she laughed. "It's not like I'll be alone with no one else on board." And for the first few days, it was exactly what she wanted. Cocktails by the pool, excursions at port, long hours reading on her balcony. Her cabin steward was a man named Marco, polite, friendly, maybe too friendly. "Good morning, Miss Claire," he'd say, smiling just a little too long when he passed her in the hallway. At first, she thought nothing of it. After all, hospitality was his job, but Marco had a way of always appearing. When she came back from dinner, there he was, polishing the banister. When she left for the spa, he just happened to be vacuuming nearby. And one night, she swore she saw him standing at the end of her corridor, motionless, watching, before quickly turning away when she noticed. Act 2, small disturbances. The first sign that something wasn't right came on the third night. Claire returned to her cabin after the evening show, unlocked the door, and froze. Her clothes were different, not missing, but rearranged. The dress she had hung on the left side of the closet was now on the right. Her shoes were neatly aligned in pairs, though she remembered leaving them scattered. At first, she thought, maybe Marco was just being helpful. Maybe it's part of the service. But then she saw her journal. The leather-bound diary she always kept zipped inside her purse. It was on her nightstand, open. The pages were flattened as though someone had been pressing them down to read. That's the moment her stomach dropped, because service was one thing going through her private writing. That was personal. That was intentional. Claire tried to rationalize it. Maybe she had left it out. Maybe she was overthinking. But deep down she knew. And then came the nights. At around 3 a.m., she was jolted awake by the sound of her door handle rattling. Not once, not twice, but a slow, deliberate tug followed by the beep of a key card swipe. She froze in bed, barely daring to breathe. The lock clunked, then stopped. Whoever it was didn't get in. Act 3 escalation. The next morning, she reported it. The front desk smiled politely. "We'll look into it." Security listened but shrugged. Maybe another guest tried the wrong room. But Claire knew better, because the very next day, she found a folded piece of paper slipped under her door. One line, scrawled in blocky handwriting. "You look beautiful in yellow." Her heart sank, because the night before, she had worn her yellow sundress to dinner, and only Marco had complimented her on it. This was no coincidence. Someone wasn't just watching her. Someone was studying her. Claire's anxiety grew. She avoided her cabin as long as possible, lingering in crowded areas. But no matter where she went, Marco wasn't far. She saw him on deck, leaning on a railing, eyes locked on her. She saw him near the buffet, pretending to clean a table while watching her sit down. Once, late at night, she even heard footsteps directly outside her door pacing. It was suffocating. Act 4, the breaking point. On the 5th night, Claire's fear became reality. She woke again at 3 a.m. to the unmistakable sound of her lock disengaging. This time, the door opened. The cabin filled with a faint glow from the hallway. Her pulse raced as she reached for the phone. But the door slowly shut again without anyone stepping in. The next morning, she demanded a security escort. Reluctantly, they searched Marco's belongings. What they found was horrifying. Inside his locker, tucked in plastic folders, were photographs. Dozens of them. Women by the pool, women in the dining hall, women laughing on balconies. Some of them sleeping in their cabins. Hidden camera angles, unaware, vulnerable. And there, among the stacks, Claire's photo, taken while she lay stretched out in a deck chair, sunglasses over her face. That was the moment Claire realized. She hadn't imagined it. She hadn't been paranoid. Marco had been watching her the entire time. But it didn't stop there. Alongside the photographs, security uncovered small, stolen items, scarves, swimsuits, pieces of jewelry. Tokens taken from women who probably never realized they were missing. And the worst part, Marco had been working on cruise ships for years. Act 5, Aftermath. When the ship finally docked, Marco was escorted off by authorities. Claire gave her statement, trembling as she signed the papers. even then, she couldn't shake the feeling. How many times had he slipped into her cabin? How many other women had been stalked without ever knowing? How many victims were still out there, carrying memories that didn't belong to them? The cruise line tried to cover it up, insisting it was an isolated incident. But word spread among passengers, and Claire would never travel alone again. Conclusion narrator Marco's story proves a chilling truth. That sometimes the biggest danger on a cruise ship isn't the storm outside or the endless ocean. It's the person with the keys to your door. So the next time you step into a cabin, look at the steward who greets you with a smile. Because behind that smile, you may never know what secrets they're hiding. Marco was exposed. But what about the dangers no one can see? Our next story shows how, when medical emergencies strike at sea, survival is not guaranteed, and time runs out faster than you think. Story 3. A heartbeat against the clock. Cruise ships sell you a beautiful lie. They call it peace of mind at sea. They show you sparkling clinics with glossy floors and smiling doctors in crisp coats. They say you'll be safe. If anything happens, we're here but 5 days into an Atlantic crossing, when the nearest shore is just a rumor on the horizon, and the ocean is nothing but miles and miles of cold blue muscle. The truth is smaller, harsher, and it comes wrapped in the sound of a human heart stumbling. I didn't know I was going to witness any of that when I took my seat in the main dining room that evening. The ship was in that golden hour quiet, sun pulled low, windows blushing, waiters gliding between tables like shorebirds skimming a tide line. A trio played Moon River so softly you only noticed it when you stopped talking. At the table beside mine, a couple in their 60s laughed over a shared dessert. He had that weathered handsomeness people get from doing more of their living outdoors than in. And she wore her hair in a neat silver bob, the kind you only maintain if you are the sort of person who makes lists for a living. They had ordered the strawberry pavlova. He tapped his fork against the meringue, making a snow of sugar. He said, "We should come back next year," with that tone of voice that assumes next year is a promise. She squeezed his hand. "You mean if you behave for a whole year?" They were the sort of strangers who make you feel weirdly fond after 5 minutes, like neighbors you hope to run into at the mailbox. Then he paused. His fork hovered over the plate as if he'd forgotten what to do with it. He blinked. He pressed the heel of his left palm into the center of his chest. "You okay, Mike?" the woman asked. He nodded too quickly. Just, he tried to inhale, and it caught as though the air had grown a burr. His face changed. Pain is a shape. You can see it take hold even if you don't have the words for it. It narrowed his eyes, pulled at one corner of his mouth. He stood as if standing would shake it loose. And then he didn't stand. He folded in on himself like a building imploding. Chairs scraped. The trio stopped mid-phrase. A waiter said, "Sir," and caught him. But gravity won. The dining room became a thin, echoing place where sound moved oddly. A woman's sob from 20 feet away. A glass falling and rolling without breaking. A chorus of "Call the nurse, call get," without any single command threading through. The wife was at his side. "Michael, Michael, look at me. You're okay. It's okay." She said it like a spell, the way people do when they've loved someone so long their mouth makes a shape the world should obey. From the far doorway, a woman in navy slacks and a white polo appeared at a sprint. Badge at her collar, hair pinned back in a no-nonsense coil. Nurse Katerina, her tag read. She dropped to her knees, spun the wheeled crash kit she'd been hauling behind her, and pressed 2 fingers to Michael's neck. "Sir, can you hear me?" She looked at the wife. "How old? Any history? Chest pain? Left arm, jaw?" 65, the wife said, breathless. He had high blood pressure. No heart attack. He's been good. We walk every day. "Michael, look at me." Another figure slid in mid-30s, calm face, dark eyes that were already measuring distance. "I'm Dr. Singh," he said, kneeling. "We're going to take care of you, sir. Can you tell me your name?" Michael tried to answer, hissed a breath that sounded like it hurt, and grimaced. One of his hands went numb and flopped against the tile. The color in his face drained toward a gray you never want to see on living skin. The monitors from the crash kit found him, leads pressed to chest. A small screen flickering to green life. A jagged line drawing itself with self-importance. Blood pressure cuff squeezed. Oximeter clipped. Numbers appeared that made Nurse Katerina's pupils sharpen. "BP dropping," she said. "O2 sats 89. 2 liters oxygen," Dr. Singh said. "Chewable aspirin now. Nitro spray 1 puff." "Sir, don't swallow the spray. Let it absorb." He looked at the wife. "Does he take any medication for erectile dysfunction?" He said it clinically, but soft, as if embarrassed for the word itself. The wife blinked. No, just lisinopril. And she ran into the hard limit of memory. God, I don't. Michael handles it. Her eyes found his and flinched. He wasn't focusing. Nurse Katerina leaned close to the wife. "You're doing great," she said, which is what you tell someone who is breaking so they don't shatter. "When did the pain start?" "Before dinner." During, she whispered. He said, her voice went tiny. He said the dessert looked like a cloud. They loaded him onto a stretcher as if he were made of glass. dining room split around them to let them pass. The trio looked at their hands. Everyone else looked at the floor. I followed at a distance. I told myself was respectful, but that, in truth, was rubbernecking dressed up as concern. We do that. We pretend curiosity is witness. The ship's medical center lives where ships keep their realities down on a lower deck where the air smells like disinfectant and machines, where prints of cheerful seaside paintings hang crooked on beige walls. The waiting area could have been any urgent care on land. 4 chairs, a table with magazines, a ficus with dust in the curl of its leaves. Beyond the double doors, curtains, stainless steel, that delicate medical quiet that exists right before it isn't quiet anymore. They put Michael in a room with too much light. The EKG paper spooled out, black teeth marching. He'd gone clammy, his skin cool to the touch. Sternum pain, Dr. Singh asked, fingers palpating in practiced patterns. Radiating nausea. Yes, he said, or tried. Yes. The word came out the size of a dime. The wife hung on the edge of the bed, one hand on his shin through the stiff white sheet, as if friction could anchor him here. Elaine, he breathed. It sounded like apology. This is a heart attack, Dr. Singh said, eyes flicking between Michael's face and his monitor. He didn't say it to frighten, he said it like directions. We're going to treat aggressively. We have oxygen, we have nitro, we have pain control. We're starting a heparin drip. We have thrombolytics if we need them. He looked at Elaine. Do you know where his medications are? You need the list. They are in the cabin, she said, already knowing that was the wrong answer. Okay, he nodded once, as if to file the information in a mental drawer. Someone will go. They started the drip. They set lines. They spoke in the short, neat sentences of people who know that words can get in the way of actions. They would have needed a catheter lab if they had been on land. They would have needed a cardiologist. Wires guided up through an artery to prop open a fatally stubborn vessel. But this was not land. This was the mid-Atlantic, the long, empty middle of a story where help is a character that doesn't enter until the 3rd act. And by then, sometimes, all the good lines are gone. Can we airlift? Nurse Katerina asked over the sound of the monitor, over the small huff of oxygen. Weather, headwinds, nightfall in 2 hours, Dr. Singh said. We're 600 miles from land. The Azores are the closest. Range is tight, weather's ugly. We'll call anyway. He looked at Elaine. We've notified the bridge. The captain is coordinating. We may divert. Do it, she said. Divert, please, do everything. We are, he said, and he meant it. They shifted into that frozen time that emergency rooms know, minutes that feel like hours. Hours that slip past, and you're still counting. stabilized for 30 minutes after the first nitro and the heparin. His color improved by an unconvincing shade. He made a joke that sounded like a man trying to hold his own hand. Always wanted to be the center of attention. Elaine laughed in the brittle way people laugh when they need to sell hope to their own bones. "You are ridiculous," she said, which was white for "don't you dare." Someone had called the ship's guest relations team to bring Elaine hot tea. The cup sat untouched, steam curling up as if it were trying to leave by itself. A manager with an immaculate tie hovered in the doorway and kept not entering. A deck officer stopped by with a hat tucked under his arm, and the smell of the bridge, coffee, and night air clinging to his jacket. "We've altered course due east," he said, voice pitched soft like a lullaby for adults. "We've increased speed. We're talking to the Portuguese Coast Guard. We'll get you to land as fast as possible." "How far?" Elaine asked. 18 hours, give or take," he said. He didn't say the thing his eyes said. "It's a long time at sea." Dr. Singh nodded, eyes on the numbers. "Thank you, officer." "Isn't there a helicopter?" Elaine asked, desperate. "There has to be. Please, we're working on it," the officer said. "Weather is an issue. Range is an issue. We will try every option." Michael's heart did that treacherous stutter again at 8:43 p.m. A little arrhythmia like a hiccup. Then it did it again. The monitor protested with a series of beeps that made my own pulse lurch. "VTAC," Nurse Katerina said. "Runs." "Magnesium," Dr. Singh said. "Prepare for cardioversion if necessary." Elaine reached for Michael's hand, and he gripped it as if his fingers remembered the shape of her from before they had names. "I'm okay," he said, as if he were telling his own heart. He wasn't. If this were a scripted story, there would be a triumphant moment here. A helicopter beating the air into salvation. A miracle drug with both syllables and promises longer than anyone could pronounce. Reality is less cinematic. Reality is tremor in a doctor's left eyelid, an exhausted nurse's knuckles shining under too thin skin, a captain doing math on a chart that doesn't care about love. The Coast Guard radioed back at 9:06 p.m. Conditions marginal, range critical, window narrow. Translation: maybe, maybe not. And if not, Dr. Singh made calls, the sort where a person's voice becomes a rope they throw at someone on the other end of the ocean. A telemedicine consultant somewhere in a bright office on land advised doses, agreed with choices, signed off on the possibility of thrombolytics if Michael's numbers dived too low to climb back. "Risks?" Elaine asked. "Bleeding," Dr. Singh said. He didn't say brain. He didn't say gut. He said, "We weigh them when time takes takes away choices. Do it, she said, because when you love someone, you learn to consent to all the verbs that might keep them alive. Michael slept in little uneven lengths. He woke and apologized to his wife for the way the night had folded wrong. He apologized to Dr. Singh for ruining his evening. Dr. Singh smiled in that way doctors smile when they are keeping a ceiling from falling with their back. You picked my favorite time, he said. This is when the quiet patients show up to keep me humble. Around midnight, the sky deepened from black to the kind of black that has weather in it, something with teeth. The ship rolled a little. Not much, just enough to tilt the world so that every wheeled thing in the medical center developed the urge to move. Someone wedged the crash kit with a rubber stopper. The Roman 4 poles clicked annoyingly in their holders. At 12:41 a.m., the arrhythmias came back, more sure of themselves now, less like visitors and more like landlords. The monitor alarmed until the sound felt like it would drill into the back of my skull and live there. Spare me your drama, Nurse Katerina said to the machine, because sometimes you bargain with inanimate objects when you can't bargain with fate. Fentanyl for pain, Dr. Singh said. Push slowly. He looked at Michael. Sir, this may make you a little woozy. That's okay. It's going to help. What happens when we get to land? Elaine asked, because this is what you ask when you cannot bear the present any longer. They'll take him to a hospital right away. Yes, Dr. Singh said. Cath lab, specialists, everything we wish we had right now. He didn't add if he makes it that far. The ship's speed felt different by 2 in the morning. You can't see speed from a window in the dark, but the hull tells you. It hums at a frequency you feel under your teeth. We were burning fuel like a dare. Coast Guard finally said no at 2:13 a.m. The words came through the radio in polite, bureaucratic syllables, but what they meant was simple. The machine that might have grabbed a human being out of the middle of nowhere could not get to the middle of nowhere tonight. Elaine sank into the chair. Not collapsed, sank, like a person learning how heavy bodies really are. She covered her eyes and made a sound tiny as a broken shell. Dr. Singh put a hand on her shoulder, quick and human, the way you might steady someone at the curb when a truck roars past. At first light, the officer said from the doorway, voice very soft, they'll reassess. We're still running for the Azores. The next hours exist in my memory as a smear of light and small noises, the squeak of latex, the soft swear when a vein misbehaved, the bracing cheer someone in the back hallway tried to lend to the sentence, "We're doing great," and how it landed like a feather on a rock. At 3:22 a.m., Michael said, "I'm tired. in the tone of a child past bedtime. "I know," Elaine said. Stay with me." He did what people do when they are brave in the wrong way. He tried to minimize. "I'm okay," he said, eyes flitting like birds. The sentence frayed. He looked at Dr. Singh. "Am I?" "You're here," Dr. Singh said. "That's what matters. Stay with us." At 3:27 a.m., Michael's heart stopped pretending to cooperate. The room became the size of a head of a pin. "We're in VF," Nurse Katerina said, voice dropping into that firm register made of steel and prayer. "Charging." "Clear," Dr. Singh said, and the paddles delivered their small lightning. Michael's body jumped. The lines spiked, shuddered, and then shrugged. "Again," Dr. Singh said, and the word reached down into a place in my chest I didn't know words could reach. 30 minutes is a very long time when you are talking to electricity. 30 minutes while the ocean throws a polite shoulder under the ship, while a machine shrills, while a nurse counts compressions in a voice that is not from anywhere near this planet. At 3:59 a.m., the air changed. It wasn't colder. It wasn't warmer. It was just air that people had stopped trying to tell what to do. Dr. Singh said a time with a voice that would never forget it. Nurse Katerina wrote it down, numbers swallowing everything else on the page. Elaine made a sound I am not going to describe, because it wasn't a sound so much as the absence of every sound. And if I try to write it down, I will make it smaller than it was. No one speaks much about ship morgues in the brochures. The medical center doesn't tell you about the room on the lowest deck where metal waits. But it's there, on a long crossing with a lot of older guests. It has to be. The body bag was blue. The zipper was louder than anything else in the universe in that moment. 2 security officers carried with a kind of respectful competence that made me want to both thank them and ask them to never touch anything I love. Elaine walked beside, a hand hovering an inch over the bag, as if touching were a verb her body could not bear accomplishing. The hallway to the morgue was narrow. The door was beige and unremarkable. Somewhere above us, people with no idea slept. Afterward, the ship produced people whose job was to soften edges. A counselor who spoke in gentle paragraphs. A guest relations manager who said arrangements and assistance and compassionate fare. A security officer who apologized with his shoulders for the way the world works. They asked Elaine if she wanted to disembark at the Azores or wait until the next port. It sounded grotesque, the way grief makes logistics obscene, but it wasn't. It was necessary. The morgue had limited space. Paperwork had to flow like some quiet river while other rivers could not. She asked to see him again before she decided. She went into the cold room. She came out with her hair at a new angle, as if grief had rearranged her skull. "We'll go to the Azores," she said. "Every ship has a way of swallowing tragedy because it has to." Breakfast still opened at 7. The trio played Moon River again the next night because the schedule told them to. People whispered in hallways, the kind of whisper that thinks it's respectful when it's really just fear dressing up. Rumors mutated in the elevators like viruses. Someone said he'd choked on food. Someone said he'd fallen down the stairs. Someone said the captain had refused a helicopter to save fuel. On the internet later, when the story got legs, people would say worse, because the distance between a stranger's pain and your keyboard has a way of turning human beings into characters you feel licensed to edit. Elaine left the ship wearing the same outfit she'd been wearing at dinner. There was a new crease in it where the night had sat. A young officer carried her bag. She didn't see the passengers who pressed against the atrium railing to watch. Or if she did, she refused to give our eyes any power over her. A van drove away. The ship turned its head back toward its timetable because schedules don't ease their grip for death. I didn't sleep much for the rest of the crossing. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the monitor alarm, which is one thing when it's a sound in a room, and another when it's inside your skull. And I kept coming back to that lie. No, not a lie. Not exactly. More like an omission the size of the horizon. The one where big ships and big companies let you believe that a clinic with good lighting and a crash cart is the same as a hospital that can open an artery and set stubborn muscle free. After we docked in New York, someone sent me a link to a local news story. Widow files suit against cruise line. The headline said, as if words like that could contain what had actually happened. The article quoted lawyers the way articles do. Misrepresentation, reasonable expectation, world-class care. It quoted the company. "We are saddened. We followed all protocols. Our thoughts are with the family." It quoted no one who had stood in a hallway at 4 in the morning and listened to a zipper. I thought about writing to Elaine, but I didn't. Maybe I should have. Maybe what we owe each other when we're shipmates in the oldest sense is witness, not friendship. Maybe a letter from a stranger who watched her world change would have been one more stone in a pocket she was already using to keep herself upright. Or maybe it would have been the exact proof she needed that someone, just one someone saw. Here is what I know. Dr. Singh did everything he could with the tools he had in a place where the rules are different. He didn't hide from hard sentences. He didn't pretend equipment could conjure what it couldn't. He held a line sewn from skill and something older than skill, and he did not let go until the sea told him to. Nurse Katerina is the kind of person you want with you when the sky steps closer than it should. She counts out compressions with the kind of quiet fury that makes death work for it. The captain ran that ship faster than a spreadsheet likes and pointed its nose at land with a stubbornness I will always be grateful for, even if grateful is the wrong word. And the ocean didn't notice. It lifted and lowered 8 decks and 15 restaurants and 1,000 people's schedules like a toy in a bath. And then it did it again. The ocean has never once cared about our promises. If you're listening to this because you like scary stories, I'm sorry. This isn't the kind with shadows and footsteps and doors that open a crack. It's the kind with fluorescent lights and numbers that won't behave, and the sound of a person you love making a sound you can't describe. If you travel, ask questions. Ask them at booking, not at midnight in a hallway that smells like bleach. What happens if? How far is? Who decides when? Where is the line between protocol and possibility? What exactly does world class mean when the world is 600 miles away? And if you ever hear someone at a table beside you say, next year, say a little prayer for them. Not because you are superstitious, but because our lives are built on rickety scaffolds of nexts, and all it takes is one stutter of muscle to remind us that next is a gift we can't bank. I keep thinking about that pavlova, about the way he tapped his fork delicately against the meringue, about how the last sweet taste he had was something he shared with the woman who had probably cut his hair for him when it grew crooked, who had told him to slow down when he refused to, who had carried a tiny list of his medications in her head like a secret song until fear erased the lyrics. A heartbeat is a small thing. We mistake its reliability for fact. We tell ourselves that because it has always come back, it always will. On land, when it falters, a city leans in with 1,000 hands. At sea, sometimes all you have is a room that looks like an urgent care, and the will of a handful of people who refuse to let your last hour be quiet. Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes it isn't. That's not a satisfying end to a story, but it's the truth you buy when you hand your life to a floating city and sail into the middle of nowhere, trusting that if anything happens, they are here. They are. But sometimes, out there, here just isn't close enough. One heartbeat ended in silence, and then came the storm. A minor system, they said, until the waves swallowed decks and darkness consumed the ship. Story 4. When the storm ate the ship. The first day of the cruise had been perfect. Families lounged on deck chairs, kids splashed in the pool, and couples sipped cocktails while the ship slid smoothly along the coastline. The captain's voice over the intercom had been calm and reassuring. Ladies and gentlemen, just a minor tropical system ahead. Nothing to worry about. We'll adjust course slightly, but your vacation will continue as planned. Passengers laughed, clinked glasses, and carried on. After all, wasn't that what cruises were for? An escape from reality. A floating city where danger didn't exist. But as the sun set on the second night, reality proved itself much crueler. At first, it was just wind, a steady howl that made flags snap and sent napkins skittering across the dining room tables. The horizon darkened faster than usual, clouds swallowing the last streaks of orange light. Guests pulled their jackets tighter as they walked the decks. Some muttered to each other, "Doesn't look so minor, does it?" By midnight, the ocean had transformed into something monstrous. Waves slammed against the hull, spraying icy water up over the railings. The ship groaned with every hit, metal shuddering like bones under too much strain. In the staterooms, glasses toppled from shelves. Closet doors creaked open and slammed shut. The once steady hum of the engines now sounded strained, uneven. Still, the crew assured passengers everything was fine. Just turbulence, one steward said to a frightened family in the hallway. "Stay in your cabins. It will pass." But it didn't pass. It grew. At 1:47 a.m., a wave taller than a 3-story building smashed against the side of the ship, sending a tremor through every deck. Passengers were thrown from their beds. Plates crashed to the floor. Somewhere, a child screamed. On the top decks, water surged through open balcony doors, flooding cabins. Furniture floated, mattresses turned to rafts. Panic began to spread like wildfire. In one cabin, a young couple clung to each other, listening as the walls shook. The man tried to call the front desk, but the line only buzzed. The woman whispered, "What if it flips? What if we sink?" He didn't answer. Outside, thunder cracked so loud it rattled the mirrors from the walls. By 2:30 a.m., the storm had fully swallowed the ship. Lightning lit up the sky, revealing monstrous waves that seemed to toy with the vessel, lifting it high before slamming it down again. Passengers staggered through hallways, barefoot, clutching children, searching for help that wasn't there. Water dripped from ceilings. The air smelled of salt, metal, and fear. Then, at a exactly 3:04 a.m., the engines died. The humming stopped. The lights flickered once, twice, and then went black for thousands of people. The ship was now a coffin drifting in pitch darkness. Only the roar of the storm remained. In sealed cabins, the electronic locks froze. Some passengers pulled at their doors in terror, but they would not budge. Mothers beat their fists against the wood, screaming for help. Children cried in the darkness, their small hands pressed against cold metal. The emergency system should have kicked in. It didn't. The corridors became black tunnels filled with panicked voices. Down in the lower decks, a group of college students tried to make their way toward the muster stations. Flashlights from their phones shook as their hands trembled. One of them slipped on the wet floor, nearly tumbling down a staircase as water sloshed ankle deep. "We're trapped," one of them muttered, voice quivering. "This isn't just a storm. We're not gonna make it out." On deck 10, an elderly couple pressed their balcony door shut as wave after wave smashed against the glass. With every impact, they prayed it would hold. The husband whispered, "Don't look outside. Just listen to my voice. We'll get through this." But his voice shook with every word, and below, in the crew corridors, chaos reigned. The staff ran in all directions, radios hissing with frantic orders. "Lock down the dining halls," one shouted. "Secure the kitchens." Another screamed back. But how do you secure a ship when the sea itself is tearing it apart? By 4:00 a.m., panic had overtaken reason. Some passengers demanded life vests. Others tried to force their way onto lifeboats. But in seas this violent, lowering lifeboats was impossible. It would mean certain death. Officers shouted for calm, but their voices were drowned out by thunder and fear. Meanwhile, water seeped lower into the ship. Elevators froze between decks. Toilets overflowed. The grand atrium, once filled with music and laughter, became a dark cavern where people huddled together, clutching whatever belongings they could grab. Through it all, Elaine, a schoolteacher from Florida, kept a diary on her phone. Her hands shook, but she typed every word, determined to leave a record in case they didn't survive. She wrote, "The walls sound like they're breaking. People are screaming in the hall. We are in the middle of nowhere. No one is coming. God help us." By dawn, the storm finally began to loosen its grip. The waves shrank from mountains to hills. The wind softened from a roar to a growl. Pale light spilled across the horizon, illuminating the ship. What passengers saw when they stepped outside made their blood run cold. The decks were unrecognizable. Glass shattered, twisted steel railings bent like paper clips. deck chairs scattered like children's toys across the waterlogged floors, balconies torn open, their contents swallowed by the sea. The once majestic cruise liner looked like a battlefield. Survivors walked in stunned silence, their eyes wide, their clothes soaked, their faces pale. Some wept openly. Others simply stared at the horizon, whispering prayers of gratitude or disbelief. When the ship finally limped into port 2 days later, reporters crowded the docks. Passengers staggered off, some swearing they would never set foot on a ship again. Photos of the wrecked decks went viral. Headlines screamed, "Luxury cruise nearly destroyed by storm." But those headlines only told part of the story. What they didn't capture was the fear of being locked in a black cabin with no escape. The sound of children begging their parents to make it stop. The helplessness of watching the sea toss around a massive steel ship like a toy. For those who lived through it, the storm never ended. Even years later, they woke in the night to phantom sounds, the crash of waves, the sudden silence of engines dying, the screams in the dark. Because when you faced the ocean's full fury, you never forget. And for those on board that night, one truth burned into their memory forever. When the storm decides to eat the ship, there is nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. You can only wait and pray that you'll see the dawn. The storm tore steel apart. But obsession can be even more dangerous. Our next story follows an older couple whose grief twisted into something disturbingly possessive. Story 5. The couple who wanted a daughter. They boarded the cruise expecting glaciers, fresh air, and quiet relaxation. What they found instead was obsession. This is the story of how an innocent honeymoon voyage along the Alaskan coast turned into a nightmare of manipulation, fear, and psychological terror. Because sometimes the scariest monsters aren't born from the ocean. They're sitting right across the dinner table, smiling at you and calling you sweetheart. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will haunt you long after this video ends. Scene 1, setting the stage. The ship was called the Northern Star, a massive floating city carrying thousands of tourists eager to see the last frontier. The air was crisp, seagulls circled the harbor, and the cold promise of glaciers lay ahead. Among the passengers was a newly married couple, Claire, a 27-year-old nurse, and her husband Ethan, a quiet but adventurous software engineer. They'd saved for years for this trip. Claire imagined lazy breakfasts on deck, watching whales breach the icy water. She never imagined what she would actually find, eyes that followed her every step. Scene 2, the first encounter. On the third evening, After a long day of sightseeing, Claire and Ethan entered the ship's main dining hall. That's when Claire noticed them for the first time. An older couple sitting alone at a corner table. The man, gray hair, stern expression. The woman, nervous, wide-eyed, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a wine glass. As Claire passed, the woman froze. Her lips parted. And then she whispered so softly that only Claire could hear. You look just like my little girl." Claire gave an awkward smile, not knowing how to respond. She hurried after Ethan, dismissing it as a strange comment from a lonely tourist. But deep inside, something about the way those eyes locked on hers unsettled her. Scene 3, Escalation. The next day, the couple appeared again. This time, in the lounge. Claire and Ethan had just sat down with coffee when the woman approached. "Sweetheart," she said, voice trembling. May I sit with you?" Before Claire could answer, the woman sat down and reached for her hand. Her palm was ice cold. "You have her eyes," the woman murmured. "The same smile, my little girl, she was taken from me." Ethan tried to intervene, gently pulling Claire's hand back, but the husband appeared suddenly behind them. He smiled stiffly, almost forced. "Don't mind her," he said. "Susan gets emotional sometimes." But then he leaned closer to Ethan, lowering his voice. "Let her have this moment." Claire and Ethan excused themselves quickly. But as they walked away, Claire swore she could feel Susan's eyes drilling into her back. Scene 4, the obsession deepens. From that night on, the Hendersons, as they later learned their names, were everywhere. At breakfast, they appeared in line behind them. On the observation deck, they stood only a few feet away, staring. Even during a shore excursion, Claire spotted Susan watching her through the crowd, tears streaming down her face. One night, while Claire was brushing her hair in the cabin mirror, Ethan walked in pale and shaken. "They followed me," he said, "all the way from the bar. He kept asking if you'd ever been adopted, if your parents were really your parents." Claire's brush froze mid-stroke. Her stomach twisted. Then came the worst moment yet. Scene 5, Dinner with the Hendersons. The ship hosted a formal dinner night. Claire and Ethan reluctantly attended, hoping the crowd would keep them safe. But somehow, the Hendersons ended up at the very next table. Throughout the meal, the husband engaged Ethan in small talk, sports, travel, the weather. But beneath the tablecloth, Susan reached for Claire's hand again. Her nails dug into Claire's skin. "You could come home with us," she whispered. Her eyes glistened with feverish hope. "You don't have to call me Mom right away, but in time you will." Claire pulled her hand back sharply. Her chair screeched against the floor. Other diners looked over. Ethan stood up, furious, and shouted, Leave us alone." The Hendersons didn't flinch. Susan just smiled through tears. "You'll understand," she whispered. "One day." Scene 6, Trapped at Sea. After that night, Claire and Ethan avoided all public areas. They locked themselves in their cabin, curtains drawn, lights off. But the nightmare didn't stop. Twice, they heard faint knocks on the door. Once, when Ethan peered through the peephole, Susan was standing there. Just standing, smiling. Another time, Ethan swore he saw the husband lingering in the hallway, hands folded behind his back. As if guarding the cabin, Claire wrote in her journal, "We are trapped. We are prisoners on this ship. Every time I hear footsteps, I wonder if it's them." Scene 7, Breaking Point. On the 6th night, Claire excused herself to use the restroom near the theater. As she washed her hands, the door creaked open behind her. It was Susan. She moved quickly, blocking the exit. Her eyes were wild, her voice trembling. "Please, just come with us. You don't know what it's like to lose a child. I can't go through life without you. You're her. I know you're her." Claire's chest tightened, her pulse pounded. "I'm not your daughter," she said firmly, voice breaking. "Leave me alone." Susan reached out, fingers brushing Claire's cheek. "Don't say that, sweetheart, don't." Claire shoved past her and ran. That night, Claire and Ethan demanded security intervention. But the crew dismissed it as a misunderstanding. Eccentric passengers, they called them. No real threat, but to Claire and Ethan, it was real. Terrifyingly real. Scene 8, The Last Night. The final night of the cruise arrived. Claire barely slept, terrified of what might happen before they reached port. At 2 a.m., there was one last knock at the door. This time, they didn't answer. They didn't move. They just lay in bed, clutching each other, listening to the sound of soft whispers outside the cabin. Words they couldn't quite make out, but words meant for Claire. When morning came, the Hendersons were gone. They disembarked like everyone else, blending into the crowd. No police, no arrests. Just two faces in the sea of travelers. But for Claire, the nightmare didn't end. Scene 9, Aftermath. Back home, Claire found herself checking the windows at night, flinching whenever an unfamiliar car slowed in her neighborhood. She kept hearing Susan's voice. "You could come home with us." Even years later, Claire couldn't step onto a cruise ship again. The ocean wasn't what haunted her. It was the memory of eyes that looked at her not with malice, but with twisted love. Because obsession can be scarier than hatred. Because sometimes people don't want to hurt you. They just want to keep you. Forever. So, what do you think? Were the Hendersons simply grieving parents who lost their minds in grief, or something darker, more dangerous? One thing's for sure, on the open sea, there's nowhere to run. And when a stranger whispers, "You look just like my daughter," Don't look away, because sometimes they mean it. The Hendersons left fear in their wake. Yet some intrusions cut even deeper. Imagine returning to your cabin and realizing someone else has already been inside, waiting. Story 6. The unwelcome guest in the cabin. When you book a cruise, you imagine luxury. Pools glittering under the sun, cocktails with umbrellas, a safe little world floating across the ocean. But what if that safe little world isn't safe at all? What if the real danger isn't the storm outside? It's the stranger who already has the keys to your room. Tonight, on Voices from the Other Side, we bring you the true story of two college friends who boarded a dream vacation and found themselves trapped in a nightmare of intrusion, obsession, and betrayal. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will make you think twice about ever closing your cabin door at sea. Scene 1, the beginning. It started innocently enough. Two college friends, Lena and Rachel, booked their first cruise together. They were both 21, full of energy, and hungry for adventure. For months, they saved tips from waitressing jobs, daydreaming about this week of freedom away from lectures and exams. The ship was enormous, a floating city complete with theaters, buffets, and endless rows of identical cabins. For Lena and Rachel, it felt like stepping into another world. They shared a small inside cabin on deck 7. No windows, just a snug room with twin beds, and a closet too small for all the clothes they had stuffed into their suitcases. But they didn't care, because who stays in the room on a cruise? The girls spent their days by the pool, their evenings in karaoke bars, their nights laughing until they fell asleep. For the first 3 days, it was perfect. But perfection doesn't last. Scene 2, something strange. On the 4th day, they returned from a shore excursion, sunburned, carrying souvenir bags, and opened the door to their cabin. That's when they froze. On the bed, neatly laid out, were their swimsuits. Not thrown, not forgotten, laid out carefully, as if someone had placed them there for inspection. Rachel laughed nervously. Housekeeping must have done it. But Lena shook her head. They don't touch personal clothes. Remember the sign. They won't move your stuff. Silence filled the tiny cabin. Both girls felt it, that creeping, invisible hand of unease. Scene 3, things go missing. The next day, Rachel noticed her underwear was gone. At first, she thought she had misplaced it. Cruise cabins were cramped. Clothes ended up everywhere. But then Lena's bras began disappearing too. One by one, when they complained to guest services, the crew brushed it off. Probably laundry mix-up, they said. Things get lost. But Lena knew better. These weren't laundry accidents. Someone had been inside their cabin. Scene 4, the notes. On the sixth day, the truth became undeniable. After lunch, Lena returned to the cabin alone. She found a folded piece of paper slipped under the door. Her stomach twisted as she read the words. "I like when you sit by the pool at 3 p.m. You look beautiful in blue." Her swimsuit was blue, and she had been at the pool every day at 3 p.m. When Rachel came back, Lena shoved the note into her hands. Rachel's face went pale. "This isn't random," she whispered. "Someone's watching us." That night, they didn't sleep. Every sound in the hallway felt amplified: the rattle of a cart, the muffled laughter of other passengers, the faintest footstep. They took turns sitting up, staring at the door. Scene 5, the escalation. By now, both girls were jumpy. They avoided the pool, skipped dinners, stuck to crowded spaces. But still, the notes came. Another under the door. "I like when you wear your hair up. It shows your neck." Another, tucked into the crack of the bathroom mirror. "Don't be afraid. I just want to know you." Their privacy had been stripped away. Their cabin was no longer a sanctuary. It was a stage, and someone was pulling the curtains back whenever they pleased. Then came the final straw. Late one night, as Lena tried to doze, she heard it. The rattle of the door handle. Someone was testing it. Slowly, carefully. She sat up, heart pounding, and hissed Rachel's name. They both listened in the dark. The handle rattled again. A faint click of metal, like a key sliding into a lock. "Someone's trying to get in," Rachel whispered. Lena grabbed the phone and called security, her voice trembling. By the time officers arrived, the hallway was empty. Scene 6, investigation. Security at first suspected a rogue crew member. It wasn't unheard of stories circulated of stewards abusing master keys, but the truth turned out to be worse. The next evening, officers came to Lena and Rachel's cabin. "We found him," one said grimly. "Not a crew member, not a steward. A passenger, a man in his late 30s, had been slipping money to low-level staff, bribing them for brief access to master keys. Just long enough to enter certain cabins. When they searched his room, what they found made the girls' blood run cold. Bags full of women's clothing. Not just theirs, dozens of items, stolen across multiple cruises. Bras, underwear, swimsuits, even journals and toiletries, and photographs. Hundreds of them, pictures of women taken without their knowledge, eating breakfast, sunbathing by the pool, reading on deck chairs, including dozens of Lena and Rachel. Scene 7, aftermath. The man was removed from the ship at the next port. Officials promised he would be handed over to authorities. But for Lena and Rachel, the damage was done. They spent the rest of the cruise barricaded in their cabin, too afraid to sleep. The thought of those photographs haunted them. How many times had he been watching? How often had he stood right outside their door? When the ship finally docked back home, they walked off without looking back. Their dream vacation had become a nightmare they couldn't escape fast enough. Scene 8. Reflection. Months later, Lena admitted she still checked every hotel room she stayed in, pulling open closets, scanning for hidden cameras. Rachel confessed she still woke up at night, convinced she heard the sound of a door handle rattling. And both of them knew one thing for certain. Cruises might promise paradise, but the truth is far darker. Because out there on the open sea, privacy is an illusion. And sometimes, the person walking past you in the hallway, smiling politely, is the same person who already has a key to your room. So, what do you think? Was this man just a sick opportunist who finally got caught? Or has this been happening far more often than anyone admits? Next time you lock your door on vacation, ask yourself, who else has a copy of that key? Stay with us, because more stories like this are waiting just beyond the cabin door. The stalker was finally unmasked. But even the strongest locks mean nothing when the entire ship shuts down. Our next tale leaves thousands drifting, powerless, in the cold, dark Atlantic. Story 7. Adrift in silence. When we think of a luxury cruise, we imagine endless buffets, live shows, bright casinos, and laughter echoing across the decks. But in February of that year, one ship in the middle of the North Atlantic turned from a floating palace into a drifting coffin, because when the lights went out and every backup generator failed, 500 passengers found themselves trapped in the cold, in the dark, floating on a silent sea. What happened over the next 48 hours would scar many of them forever. Stay with me, because this isn't just a story about mechanical failure. This is a story about what happens when comfort, safety, and civilization vanish in a single moment. Scene 1, the perfect beginning. It was supposed to be a routine voyage. The ship, the Aurora Star, was one of the newer vessels in the fleet, 15 decks high, with neon-lit promenades and restaurants boasting the finest dining at sea. On the second night, passengers filled the theaters, the lounges, the buffet lines. The air smelled of champagne and grilled lobster tails. Kids splashed in the pools under artificial stars in the glass-roofed solarium. To most, the Atlantic was just an afterthought. Ship was so massive, so alive with energy, that the ocean outside felt like a distant backdrop. No one realized how fragile that illusion really was. Scene 2 flicker. It began around 11:17 p.m. A sudden flicker. Lights dimmed, came back. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the piano lounge. Then, a minute later, the ship jolted. Drinks spilled, glasses shattered. Somewhere deep below, the engines groaned. Then, darkness. The hum of the air conditioning stopped. Music cut out mid-note. Elevators froze between decks. For a moment, the ship drifted in eerie silence, broken only by confused voices. But then, the backup generators kicked in. A cheer rose as emergency lights buzzed to life in the hallways. The crew reassured passengers. Just a minor technical glitch. Nothing to worry about. But that was a lie. Scene 3, cascading failure. Within the hour, the truth revealed itself. One by one, the backup systems began to die. The kitchen refrigerators stopped humming. Slot machines in the casino froze. Cabin lights blinked out deck by deck. By 1:00 a.m., the engines had gone completely silent. The Aurora Star was no longer slicing through the water. It was drifting, helpless, on the mercy of the Atlantic. Ladies and gentlemen, the captain's voice echoed through crackling speakers. We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain calm. But the calm wouldn't last. Scene 4, the ship in the dark. By morning, the scale of the disaster was undeniable. With no engines, the toilets stopped working. Waste began backing up, spilling onto bathroom floors. The smell seeped into hallways, sour and suffocating. The air conditioning failed. In the winter Atlantic, temperatures dropped quickly. Passengers wrapped themselves in blankets, huddling together in hallways for warmth. The kitchens could no longer cook food. Lines formed for cold sandwiches, rationed fruit, and bottled water. Fights broke out when supplies ran low. And worst of all, the silence. Cruise ships are supposed to hum, to buzz, to pulse with the constant rhythm of engines. But now, the Aurora Star was dead. Scene 5, life aboard the coffin. For 2 days, life on the ship became something out of a nightmare. Parents tried to calm screaming children, their faces pale in the glow of dying flashlights. The elderly trembled in wheelchairs as the cold crept into their bones. Cell phones began to die. At first, passengers used their screens as lanterns in the hallways, but by the second night, most batteries were gone. Rumors spread faster than the cold. Someone died in their cabin. The crew isn't telling us everything. They say we're drifting toward a storm. With no communication, paranoia flourished. Some passengers wept openly. Others raged at the crew, demanding answers. A few simply stared out into the black Atlantic, whispering prayers into the wind. Scene 6, the breaking point. On the second night, Panic hit a breaking point. Locked electronic doors failed in some cabins, trapping passengers inside. Desperate screams echoed down the hall as people pounded on walls, begging to be released. Others began forcing their way into restricted areas, searching for hidden food or warmer places to sleep. Security tried to intervene, but even their radios were dying. In one surreal moment, passengers lit the grand atrium with hundreds of candles from the gift shop, transforming the once lavish space into something that looked more like a medieval church during a plague. That's when a passenger whispered, "It feels like we're already dead. Like this ship is a coffin and we're just waiting to sink." Scene 7: Rescue. Finally, after 46 endless hours, salvation appeared. Just after dawn on the third day, a faint light shimmered on the horizon. Another ship. By afternoon, rescue vessels surrounded the Aurora star. Supplies were ferried over: bottled water, blankets, medical kits. Passengers wept as they saw the uniforms of Coast Guard officers boarding the ship. Engines roared to life again, not the Aurora's, but the tugs pulling her slowly, painfully, back toward port. The nightmare was over, at least for now. Scene 8: Aftermath. In the weeks that followed, passengers told their stories to anyone who would listen. Lawsuits piled up against the cruise line. Negligence, they said. False promises. One woman recalled how her child had whispered in the dark, "Mommy, are we going to die out here?" Another described the silence, the way it pressed down on them, heavier than the cold. And all agreed on one thing: those 2 days changed them. Because for 46 hours, 500 people learned the truth. At sea, you're never really in control. When the engines stop, when the power fails, civilization ends. And all that's left is silence. So the next time you step aboard a cruise ship, look around. The bright lights, the endless buffets, the music and laughter. And remember, those things are fragile. They can vanish in an instant. And when they do, you may find yourself not in a palace at sea, but in a coffin adrift in silence. Stay with us, because the ocean has many more stories to tell. Adrift in silence, passengers prayed for rescue. But the next horror required no storm, no blackout, just a railing a few inches too low, and a scream lost to the sea. Story 8: The Balcony Fall. They boarded the ship as husband and wife, newlyweds, 2 people in love, with their whole future ahead of them. But within days, that dream would end with a scream, a splash, and an empty balcony staring into the black Atlantic. This is the story of a honeymoon turned nightmare, and how just a few inches of steel, or the lack of it, can mean the difference between life and death. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear is as tragic as it is terrifying. Scene 1, the beginning of forever. It was their honeymoon. Emily and Daniel had been married for only 4 days when they stepped aboard the Ocean Serenade, a luxury liner bound for the Caribbean. Emily was radiant. Her friends had joked that she glowed brighter than the ship's chandeliers. Daniel couldn't stop smiling. They spent their days exploring every corner of the vessel, dancing under the stars, toasting champagne at sunset, whispering promises about the life they were about to build together. Passengers noticed them the way newlyweds often stand out. Their hands always intertwined, their laughter contagious. On the 4th night, the sea was calm. The moon hung like a pearl over the black water. And Emily decided she wanted a picture that would never be developed. Scene 2, the balcony. It was just after midnight when Emily slipped outside their cabin. Daniel followed with 2 glasses of wine. The air was crisp. Waves whispered below. The reflection of the moon stretched across the water like a silver ribbon. Emily leaned against the railing, phone in hand. She laughed, saying, "Hold on, I want the perfect shot. The moon looks like it's dancing on the water." Daniel set the wine down and watched her adjust her angle. She raised her phone higher, leaned forward just slightly, then a little more, and then it happened. A sharp gasp, a scrape of shoes against the deck, then a scream and a splash. Scene 3, the scream. For a split second, Daniel froze. He thought maybe she'd dropped her phone. Maybe she was joking. But when he rushed to the railing, there was nothing, just the endless black water and ripples spreading outward. "Emily," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Emily." Passengers nearby came running. Someone shouted, "Man overboard." The ship's alarm began to wail. Within minutes, floodlights cut across the waves. The captain slowed the vessel, turning it sharply into the wind. Crew members threw lifebuoys, launched search boats. Daniel leaned so far over the railing that others had to hold him back. His face was pale, his hands trembling. But the sea kept its secret. Scene 4, the search. For hours, the ship combed the ocean. Passengers lined the decks, eyes straining in the harsh glow of spotlights. Some prayed, some cried. Daniel begged the crew, "She's a strong swimmer, please. She's out there. She has to be." But the water was frigid, the waves merciless. Time dragged on, and hope thinned like smoke. By 4 a.m., the search was called off. The captain made the announcement no one wanted to hear. "We regret to inform you the missing passenger has not been found." Daniel collapsed on the deck, sobbing into his hands. Seen 5 whispers among passengers. In the following days, rumors spread. She jumped. No, he pushed her. I heard she was drunk. Someone said the railing was too low. Everyone had an opinion, but no one had seen the moment she went over. Only Daniel had witnessed it, and his grief was unbearable. Passengers gave him a wide berth, as though tragedy were contagious. He wandered the ship like a ghost, replaying the moment over and over. The scream, the splash, the silence. Scene 6, the investigation. When the Ocean Serenade docked days later, authorities boarded immediately. Daniel was questioned for hours. They examined the balcony. That's when investigators noticed something unsettling. The railing was shorter than international standards, just a few inches below regulation. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, but those inches mattered. With the ocean below and nothing but steel between safety and death, a few inches can be fatal. Witnesses confirmed Emily had leaned forward, just slightly. The angle for her photo pushed her center of gravity past the tipping point. It wasn't suicide. It wasn't foul play. It was negligence. Scene 7, the hidden truth. Reporters swarmed the story. Cruise lines promised world-class safety. But quietly, inspectors admitted not every ship in the fleet met updated railing standards. Emily's death became a statistic, one of dozens who fall from cruise balconies every year. But for Daniel, it wasn't numbers. It was his wife, his forever, his future. Gone in seconds, he filed lawsuits. He demanded accountability. But no amount of money could fill the emptiness of that balcony. At night, he dreamed of her scream, echoing across black water. Scene 8, the ghost of the balcony. Passengers who stayed in cabin 1203 after the incident began to whisper. Some swore they heard crying on the balcony at night. Others claimed their phones mysteriously glitched when they tried to take photos of the moon. A few said they heard a splash in the distance, though no one was in the water. Whether it was grief, guilt, or something supernatural, cabin 1203 was avoided. Even crew members admitted unease. Daniel himself never boarded another ship. He said the ocean had already taken enough. Scene 9, reflection. Emily was 27 years old. She never saw her first anniversary. She never grew old with the man she loved. Her story is a reminder, a warning. Cruise ships promise romance, adventure, paradise at sea. But behind the glamour, danger lurks in the smallest details. A weak railing, a missed inspection, a single careless moment. And sometimes, that's all it takes for joy to turn into horror. So the next time you step out onto a balcony, phone in hand, reaching for the perfect shot. Remember Emily. Remember that the sea doesn't forgive, and that just a few inches can be the difference between beauty and tragedy. Stay with us, because the ocean still has many more stories to tell. Ocean swallowed her instantly, but for hundreds of others, poison came not from the waves, but from the buffet table. The next story turns luxury dining into a nightmare quarantine. Story 9, the buffet outbreak, a Caribbean cruise, sunshine, music, endless food. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. Thousands of passengers laughing, drinking, and feasting on what the cruise line proudly called the largest seafood buffet at sea. But within 24 hours, paradise turned into a nightmare. Because on that floating palace, one dish carried a deadly secret. And what happened next would trap over 700 people in a living hell, adrift in the ocean, locked inside a ship that had become a floating quarantine zone. Stay with us, because this is one story you'll never forget. Scene 1, the celebration. The Caribbean Star set sail from Miami with more than 3,000 passengers on board. The first night was everything they dreamed of. Music on the deck, children splashing in the pool, couples twirling under fairy lights. But the real highlight came on day 2, the seafood buffet. Tables stretched the length of the dining hall. Towers of shrimp, oysters on ice, crab legs glistening under spotlights. Chefs in tall white hats carved whole fish while waiters poured champagne. It was the centerpiece of the cruise, the promise that had lured so many aboard. Passengers piled their plates high, snapping photos, laughing, boasting to friends back home. Look at this, the biggest buffet you'll ever see. But hidden among the delicacies was one that would change everything. Scene 2, the first signs. That night, whispers began. A woman in cabin 420 felt dizzy after dinner. She told her husband it must be the wine. By midnight, she was vomiting violently. In cabin 933, a teenager fainted in the bathroom. His parents thought it was sunstroke, but by morning, dozens more were sick. The medical center was flooded. Passengers stumbled in clutching their stomachs, pale, sweating, trembling. The ship's doctor tried to reassure them. Probably a stomach bug, nothing serious. But deep down, he knew something was wrong. Scene 3, the outbreak. By noon, it was everywhere. Hallways echoed with retching. Crew members ran with mops and buckets, trying to keep up. The smell of bleach mixed with something far worse. Sickness. In the dining room, waiters quietly cleared plates, while passengers clutched their stomachs. Some collapsed right at their tables. Announcements urged calm. just mild food poisoning. Please return to your cabins to rest. But behind the scenes, panic spread. Within 24 hours, hundreds were infected. Vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration so severe some couldn't stand. The ship's doctor whispered to the captain, "If this spreads any further, we'll lose control." Scene 4, the quarantine. Cabins became isolation cells. Families locked themselves in, praying not to get sick. Parents tried to comfort terrified children. "Why is Mommy so pale?" one little boy asked. The crew went door to door with bottled water and crackers, but supplies ran low. Meanwhile, elderly passengers were hit the hardest. Some collapsed unconscious. Helicopters were called in to evacuate them, hovering over the deck as stretchers were lifted away. Passengers gathered at windows, watching, horrified. This was no vacation anymore, it was survival. Scene 5, medical chaos. The medical bay was overflowing. Stretchers lined the corridors. Crew members fainted from exhaustion. Nurses begged for reinforcements, but there were none. The ship was alone, hours from land. The smell of sickness clung to everything. Sheets soaked with sweat. Buckets filled with bile. Hallways echoing with groans. The party ship had become something else entirely, a floating hospital. And still, the numbers rose. By day 3, more than 700 passengers were ill. Scene 6, fear and rumors. Some passengers wore masks, though they barely helped. Others blamed the crew. Some accused Daniel, the chef in charge of the buffet. Whispers turned to panic. Someone poisoned the food. They're hiding the truth. We're all trapped. We'll never get off this ship. At night, the ship grew eerily quiet. No music, no laughter. Just the sound of the ocean and the occasional cough from behind closed doors. Scene 7, the discovery. Investigators eventually traced the outbreak to a single dish. Contaminated shellfish, served raw. The seafood tower, the pride of the buffet, had been tainted before it ever left port. By the time the chefs realized, it was too late. Thousands had eaten it. The cruise line tried to downplay the scandal, but the truth was undeniable. One plate of food had turned paradise into plague. Scene 8, the return to land. When the Caribbean Star finally limped back to Miami, it was met not with cheers, but with ambulances. News crews swarmed. Cameras captured pale passengers staggering down gangways, some still clutching Roman IV bags. Daniel, the widower from cabin 1203, spoke through tears. "We came for a vacation. Instead, I thought we were going to die out there." Lawsuits followed. The cruise line paid millions in settlements, but for many, no amount of money could erase the trauma. Scene 9, the lingering fear. Passengers described nightmares for months afterward. Some swore they could still smell disinfectant when they closed their eyes. A few never stepped foot on a ship again, because once you've seen a luxury cruise turned into a prison of sickness, it's impossible to unsee it. And for the families who lost loved ones during the outbreak, the ocean would never again be a place of joy. Scene 10. Reflection. Cruise lines promise safety, luxury, indulgence. But the truth is this: one mistake, one contaminated dish can unleash chaos at sea. When you're miles from land, there are no hospitals, no reinforcements, no escape, just you, the ocean, and whatever nightmare has found its way on board. So next time you load your plate at a buffet, ask yourself, how fresh is this food? And if you're on a cruise ship, remember the Caribbean star. Because once sickness starts spreading at sea, there's nowhere to run. Stay with us. More stories from the other side are waiting. Illness spread like wildfire through the ship, but nothing prepared the final group of tourists for what awaited on shore. Because their excursion didn't end in souvenirs, it ended in gunfire. Story 10. Tour into a war zone. They sell shore excursions as little slices of paradise, guided buses, smiling locals, ancient stones warmed by sun. You step off the ship believing the world has been organized for you. Schedules laminated, risks already calculated, but on that morning in Costa Maya, the math fell apart. I remember the heat first. It rose from the pavement in watery waves as we funneled from the cruise terminal into a corral of buses painted with jungle scenes. My wife, Hannah, was giddy about the ruins. She'd been a history major, which meant she knew a dozen words for temple and none for danger. Our bus was number 4, a long white coach with tinted windows and the faint smell of disinfectant. 23 of us climbed aboard, honeymooners with matching sunglasses, a retired couple tick-marking their 50th state, a mother with a 6-year-old in a dinosaur hat, a diabetic man nursing a thermos, a grandmother in bright coral lipstick. The driver introduced himself as Louis, a compact man with a warm smile, and our guide was Marisol, hair braided tight under a wide-brimmed hat. "This is an easy day," Marisol promised over the microphone as the bus lurched onto the highway. 1 hour there, 2 hours exploring, 1 hour back. You'll be back to the ship in time for the sunset. Take water, take pictures, take your time. The stones are older than any of us. They'll be here when we're gone. There's a line you hear in every travel brochure: safe, curated, unforgettable. It hummed under her words. I watched the port recede into scrub and palm, the road unwinding straight as a taut string. Vendors vendors waved from roadside stands selling coconuts hacked open with machetes. Police trucks idled beneath palms, men in beige uniforms staring at nothing. We drove through a small town, cinder block homes painted pink and turquoise, a church with a sun-faded bell. A dog slept in the dust. It all felt simple, sleepy, harmless. If you've ever heard gunfire far away, your brain tries first to rename it. Firecrackers, construction, exhaust backfiring. Even when we turned into the dirt parking lot at the ruins and heard the first pop-pop, half of us didn't look up. The other half did, eyes unfocused, ears tilting like an animal's. Louis and Marisol exchanged a glance so quick I only caught the shiver of it. But nothing else happened. The jungle held its breath. So we followed Marisol through the archway, past the ticket booth, where a teenage boy tore stubs without looking at us, into a clearing where the first pyramid rose from the trees like a tooth. If this were a different video, I'd spend 20 minutes telling you about how beautiful it was. The steps cut sharp against sky, the carvings like puzzle pieces glimpsed through vines. How the lizards froze in place like gods of stillness. How Hannah pressed her hand against a block and whispered, "Imagine the hands that placed this." How for a moment our little world and the ancient one kissed. But this isn't that kind of video. This is about how quickly everything can crack. We had been wandering for an hour, splitting into loose clusters that drifted from temple to shadow to wooden walkway when the jungle snapped awake. It began with voices, rapid, overlapping, urgent in Spanish. Then came more of the sounds our brains no longer misnamed. Closer, dull, mechanical. Not the fireworks of celebration, but the punctuation of intent. The 6-year-old in the dinosaur hat clamped his hands over his ears and pressed his face into his mother's thigh. Somewhere behind the trees, an engine revved, then revved again. A distant shout cut in half by echo. Marisol's phone buzzed. She went pale in the way tan skin can. The eyes harden. The mouth becomes a line too thin to be a mouth. She said something to Louis I couldn't hear. He nodded, already moving. "Stay here," Marisol said into the mic, but her voice was too bright. "Well, Louis is going to check the bus. Maybe there is nothing. Maybe there is nothing." It would have been a kind lie if it could have held. We waited because obedience is easy in a group, especially when obedience looks like safety. People made small jokes to keep their mouths busy. The retired man told me about his coin collection. He favored buffalo nickels. Hannah pointed to a carving showing a figure with a serpent and whispered, "Look at the way the stone still holds the chisel lines." We were talking about anything but the noise, pretending the jungle's heartbeat wasn't quickening. Louis didn't return. Instead, 10 minutes later, he stumbled into the clearing with his shirt torn and a wet ribbon of blood painting his temple. His eyes were too wide for his face. He wasn't the careful driver anymore. He was a man. "Corin," he shouted, "run," in a voice that cut the air. Vamonos. Road blocked. Men with guns. 2 trucks. He grabbed the microphone from Marisol and threw it onto the ground as if even its small, polished metal could betray us. "They saw the bus," he said in English. "They saw me when I tried to start it. They tell me no one leaves." He looked down at his hands like they had surprised him by not shaking. "We have to hide now. If you think panic is screaming and chaos, you've never seen the other kind, the heavy kind, the kind that silences, makes people small." We pressed together without speaking. The dinosaur hat fell off, and the mother didn't pick it up. The grandmother with coral lipstick swallowed hard and took the retired man's arm in a way that made them both younger and older at once. Marisol gathered us with gestures, 2 fingers to her eyes. "Watch me, palm flat, stay low." A slicing motion across her throat, silence. She led us off the path into the green. Jungles take sound and spread it thin. Leaves rubbed leaves. The white-throated flycatchers clicked like switches. Far away, an engine throbbed, and a man laughed, a laugh shaped like a dog bark. We moved single file behind Marisol, each of us touching the backpack of the person in front like a human chain. Hannah's hand squeezed mine so tightly I could feel each bone aligning. "Phones off," Marisol whispered as we ducked under a fallen trunk. "No light. Vibrate only. If someone calls, you don't answer. If you must move, move when the wind does. Step in the footprints I leave. This is the part where the camera in your head will want to cut. Jump to the helicopter, the ending. Don't. Respect the hours. They matter." She brought us to a low stone structure crouched in the trees, half swallowed by vines. Its doorway a mouth that breathed cold. Later she would tell us it had been a storehouse, a place where food or offerings slept. Today, it would hold 23 Americans and 2 locals, and the hope that stone keeps secrets. Inside, it was dark enough to erase faces. The smell was limestone and old damp, and under it, the sour sweetness of fear. We crouched in the dust. The diabetic man sat carefully, placed his thermos on his knee like a sacred thing, and whispered to his wife to count his insulin pens. The grandmother murmured a prayer that braided Spanish and English. Padre Nostro, and our father dovetailing like hands. The dinosaur boy whimpered once, a small animal sound. His mother pressed his head into her chest. hummed the lullaby people hum when they can't remember the words. Outside, the world reorganized. Trucks growled, men shouted. A helicopter, just for a second, chopped the sky and then vanished. Gunfire popped, and since you're listening to a horror channel, you want me to describe it as flowers blooming red, I won't. I'll tell you the truth. It sounded like metal and hate, and because none of us understood the words those men shouted, our minds filled the blanks with every story we'd ever read about that road. Cartel, plaza, territory, ransom. We waited. Minutes salted into hours. Sweat trickled, mosquitoes whined. A spider the size of my palm crossed the stones, and I didn't move because fear had taught the body discipline. 2 people had to pee. They did so, mortified, in the dark corner where 1,000 years ago someone had stored maize. The smell grew close. No one complained because complaint is a luxury, and we were poor. Marisol's phone vibrated once against her thigh. A small, angry hummingbird. She checked and turned the screen away. Later, she told us it was a voice message from another guide. Don't try the road. Roadblocks at kilometer 28 and 34. Shots fired by the old bridge. Some buses forced back to the site. Stay off the highway. Military notified. Hannah tapped my knee with a single finger, our code for listen. The jungle had new voices. Boots in leaf litter. A man speaking too loudly into a radio. The dry gulp of a can emptied. They were close enough that I could hear one inhale. Close enough that if I'd coughed, he would have known my whole name. A child's sudden sniffle sliced the air, and every adult in that room flinched exactly the same way. A shared animal wince. The mother covered her son's nose and mouth, and I saw the boy's eyes, huge and swimming, and trusting his mother to be bigger than the world. The men passed, or the jungle swallowed them, or both. Time, already strange, folded. In crisis, roles surface. The retired man with buffalo nickels became an engineer again, whispering through what-ifs like blueprints. Alternate exits, load-bearing walls, airflow. The grandmother with coral lipstick turned into a nurse from the 1970 and told the diabetic to sip, not gulp. Hannah found a shard of mirror on the floor and tucked it into her pocket without comment. Later, it would be a star. At some point, the light outside softened. The heat pulled its hand back a little, and the shadows stretched their legs. Dusk is theater anywhere in the jungle. It's a conspiracy. Marisol stood, dusted her knees, and gave us a new plan in a voice that moved like a pencil drawing a map we could walk through. There's a clearing, she said. 2 kilometers, no road, only a footpath the archaeologists use. No one will expect us there. If we can reach it, I can call for a helicopter. The army uses it sometimes. It is not far, but quiet, and we have to move, while the light is not your friend and not your enemy. Can't we just wait? The honeymooner with the sunglasses said, his voice small. Can't the police come here? Marisol looked at him with a patience that did not condescend. I called. They are busy on the road. We are not their first problem. We might be their third. Do you want to be third? We did not. We moved. The jungle welcomed us with burrs that clung and roots that bit. The path, if you could call stringing footprints a path, wove around buttress roots like wings of stone. Hannah walked behind the grandmother so she could steady her when the ground sloped. The diabetic man's wife carried his bag, and he carried his dignity like a breakable bowl. Louis moved to the back, bleeding slowing, jaw tight. Every so often he would stop and listen, head cocked, and we would all freeze into birds pretending to be leaves. We crossed a low ravine where, in the wet season, water would speak in a rush. Today, it mumbled mud. At the far edge, the honeymooner misjudged a step, slid, and twisted his ankle with a pop that made bile rise in my throat. He bit his fist to keep from shouting. The retired engineer and I formed a chair with our hands and carried him until he could lean into us like a third leg. This is the part of the story a different channel would skip. I won't. Survival is ordinary before it is heroic. It looks like strangers saying, "Here, take my weight." Somewhere left, the road spat voices and engines and the shape of a siren. Somewhere right, an owl considered us and decided we weren't interesting. Above, the sky dimmed to a bruised blue. Marisol kept a pace that was possible and a path that was true. When we reached the clearing, the jungle simply stopped. It was an abrupt geometry, square grass flattened by rotors, ringed by trees that watched like judges. The air felt empty, in a way air only feels where wind has been recently big. Marisol took out her phone. The bar of service was a winter sun, weak, sliding. She called a number I didn't know you could call without a badge. She spoke quickly, Spanish like a sewing machine, words tightening around a point. Turistas, bloqueos, kilometro, zona segura temporal, evacuación. She hung up and looked at us with that same face she'd used to show us the carvings, except all the smile had been spent. "They will come," she said, "but the light is leaving. We have to make it want us." Hannah, without a word, took the shard of mirror from her pocket and handed it to Marisol. Louis opened his first aid kit. Driver's kits are like magicians' hats, and found a flare. The retired engineer rummaged in his backpack and produced something I hadn't seen since Boy Scouts. A signal panel in neon orange, folded to a square. We looked at one another like pirates who dug up the exact chest they needed. The helicopter came as a tremor before it came as a sound. The grass quivered. Birds complained. The sky thickened into wash. Then the rotor disc appeared over the trees like a coin the size of a house. It was olive drab, stencil lettered, mouth open wide as its side door slid. And a soldier looked down at us with eyes that had seen this before. The flare spat red into the blue. Marisol flashed the mirror until the soldier shielded his face with his hand. The panel bloomed. The dinosaur boy clapped once, a reflex of joy. What happened next was not cinema. It was a drill so practiced it became grace. The helicopter flared nose up to settle without touching ground too uneven. Two soldiers fast-roped with a hiss of friction, boots kissing grass, hands reaching out. They didn't ask names. They counted us with eyes, spotted the injured ankle, the child, the elderly, the bleeding driver, the diabetic man with his thermos hugged to his chest. 5 each lift. One shouted over the rotor, and my heart swelled at the English I wasn't expecting. Stay low. Hands on my vest, not the rope. Do not run toward the bird. The bird comes to you. They took the child, the mother, the grandmother, the diabetic, the honeymooner with the broken ankle first. They clipped harness to harness, and the helicopter rose like a heartbeat. The rotor wash was a machine-made hurricane that flattened the grass and took our breath with it. The birds circled, set them down somewhere we could not see beyond the trees, and returned second lift. 3 women crying and laughing at the same time. A man who had been calm too long and began to shake now that calm wasn't needed. Lewis, who argued until the soldier looked him in the eye and said, "You did enough." He went. Blood had dried into a dark comma on his cheek. Third lift, me, Hannah, the retired engineer. Marisol, who tried to refuse and failed because the soldier had an order we didn't hear. We rose, and the world shrank and expanded at once. The square became a postage stamp. The ruins bit through the trees like a set of old teeth. In the distance, smoke smudged the highway, and I made the mistake of looking. Bus parking area was a collage of blue and red lights and a column of black. I never asked if bus 2 or 3 or 7 burned. I don't know the shape of that truth. We landed next to a wide dirt road where more soldiers waited with a truck whose bed had benches welded along its sides. The grandmother held the boy on her lap and sang. The diabetic man sipped and swallowed carefully. The honeymooner's ankle had been wrapped by a field medic with hands like a piano teacher. When Marisol jumped from the bird, the soldier who'd brought her down tapped his helmet to her like a salute to a colleague. "Gracias," she said. Always, he said. When they call for tourists, they listen. I wish they listened as fast when it is us. There are truths too big for YouTube. That was one. The last 5 were lifted as the sky went to ink. The helicopter's lights made the trees look like bones. Then the bird was gone, and the soldiers were herding us into the truck with vamos, and the promise of a convoy. We rode back along a road segmented by checkpoints. Local police with tired shoulders, federal police with tired eyes, soldiers whose youth had been stripped and polished. The jungle pressed in, a black wall back at the port. The cruise terminal had been ringed in a halo of white light, like a stadium before a hurricane. Officials with clipboards waited in a line that was more theater than help. They counted us again, this time by names and passport numbers. Someone wheeled out cases of bottled water and a box of crackers, and the sight of commodities in that quantity nearly undid me. The cruise staff fluttered like nervous birds' apologies, vouchers, a hollow phrase about guest experience. The ship loomed beyond the fence, a lit city that looked obscene after the dark. I don't remember the gangway. I don't remember the cabin door closing. I remember washing jungle dust from my hands and then stopping, looking at the sink, and realizing clean water is a miracle I'd learned to ignore. I remember Hannah climbing into the bed fully dressed and staring at the ceiling as if words were written there. I remember the silence, not the comfortable kind, but the kind that made you afraid to speak lest you break the world again. News found us the way news does, in fragments. Rival groups had set up roadblocks on the highway, trying to pinch territory. A tourist bus had been stopped, passengers robbed but not harmed. Shots had been fired, not at us, but near enough to be a language we understood. The authorities declared the situation under control. The terminal resumed normal operations by morning. Our ship sailed on time. In the theater that night, a comedian did a bit about cruise people treating mild inconveniences like the end of the world. A handful of us didn't laugh. What if we hadn't taken the path? Hannah asked later on the balcony, where the sea pretended to be only sea again. We would have waited, I said, been found or not, been taken or not, been lucky or not. Wrong place, she said, tasting the words like rust. Wrong time. There's a temptation at the end of a story like this to add a moral that fits in a caption. Don't take tours. Always go with the ship's operator. Check travel advisories. Do those things. Also know they are not spells. The world doesn't care that your wristband is color-coded for safety. The jungle doesn't read disclaimers. Men with guns don't consult your itinerary. What I can tell you is this: when someone who knows the ground says run, run. When someone who knows the trees says hide, hide. When someone who knows the sky says signal, signal. And when you get home, because most of the time you will look at your sink and your logs and your loved one's face and understand that safety is not a right you were born with, but a thing built for you by invisible hands and luck and sometimes strangers. I kept the shard of mirror. It sits on my desk in a small wooden box with a scrap of neon fabric and a stone I shouldn't have taken. Sometimes I hold the mirror up and catch the sun, and for a second I hear the blades and feel the hot wind and see the grass bow. I think of Lewis's blood drying to a comma because the sentence didn't end there. I think of Marisol's calm, a kind of courage that doesn't require applause. I think of the boy in the dinosaur hat, whose mother's body became a shelter, and of the soldier who said he wished they moved as fast for their own. And then I put the mirror down and go on with my day, because life insists. But every time I board a bus in a place where I am a guest, I feel the stone room around me again, and I listen to the wind, and I remember that paradise and war can be cousins who show up to the same party uninvited. We weren't heroes. We were people who did what we were told by someone who knew better. We got lucky. Others that day, maybe on another road, in another country, did not. If you came here for catharsis, for the clean line at the end of the story, I can't give it to you. What I can give is the truth. From paradise tour to near hostage crisis, simply because we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Stay with us. The ocean keeps its secrets, but the shore has its own.